Hello guys. So welcome to the first episode of our Labview series. My name is David, and I'm gonna be going over some basics in Labview for this episode. And throughout the series, hopefully we'll do many projects that will help you guys learn what Labview is and how to work with it, at least from my perspective. And hopefully this will help me to enhance my own skills in Labview. So I will be using Labview 2011 for this. I wanted to upgrade to the 2012, but it did not seem worth it, and I have a lot of extras in my Labview 2011 module pack. Alright, so when you start off Labview, this is the screen you come to. This is basically their main opening screen. I think you can edit to not get this anymore or to change it to something else, but I like it, so it's fine with me. Most importantly here is going to be these new options that you can start with, and you can do a blank VI and you can do an empty project. This is VI from template, basically a pre-saved VI, which you might have things in it that's just, it's not important. Obviously they have more things which we're not going to cover. So these two are the most important things. In a simple way of looking at it, the empty project is simply a place where you can put a bunch of VIs together. So if you're doing a project, not only just one single VI, then you would need this. We'll go ahead and cover it when we get to more complicated systems. But for the purposes of this simple teaching, I think all we're going to do is a blank VI. So I'm going to go ahead and click on blank VI, and this will start off the system the way it works. So here we go. So this is what the VI gets you to. You get two screens, and that's always going to be there in whenever you're dealing with Labview. Now remember, Labview is more or less a visual programmer, and it's based on the C code, so you'll be using functions that are similar to C. And I'm gonna go ahead and put these one on the left and one on the right. So the one on the left here is the front panel, and the one on the right is the block diagram. Basically all that you do is gonna be right here in the block diagram, this white space. The front panel is your user interface. It's the user interface. So whenever you run your program, when you're done with it, what you see is gonna be whatever the front panel is. So that's the front end, that's the user interface, that's where the player can click buttons and can do decisions or ask for things or whatever it is that we're setting up this program to do. Now the block diagram is where all the code is. This is what the player does not see. And I'm calling him player, it's a user. I enjoy making games, so to me they're players, not users. In essence, making any code is simply getting a person to ask or do something, and then getting the computer to do more with it, or to change it, alter it, whatever. Input and output, so that's what it's all about. This is where the player or user gives input, and this is where he receives his output on the front panel, and the block diagram is where all the processing occurs. Now, it gets a little more complicated as I go along, so I'm gonna try to do this in a rhythmic fashion. To talk about these two as they are blank, on top here, on the block diagram and the front panel, you will notice these first four buttons. And these are probably the most used ones while working with the code. The first one is to run the code. In this case, if I click it, just as you see that it flashes for a second, then goes back to nothing. The next one runs it continuously. So basically, it's basically every time the code stops, it runs it again automatically. We have obviously our stop button to stop the program wherever it is, and then we have a pause button. So basically we can pause the program, look at it, and then unpause it. This here is just not important to us. These here are used to align objects and to again, it's just, since this is a visual programming system, then you need to align things together because it's not line by line text as normal codes are. I'm gonna go to the block diagram now and show you a few things before we get to these familiar ones. Most importantly is this light bulb. The rest is not that important. The light bulb here is our debugging mode, and you'll get to see how it works when we actually have a system. But it basically shows you what's happening to your variables, how they are moving, and shows you the order of execution of your program. That is one feature that's very interesting in Labview, which does not exist in normal C code, is that you can actually have multiple things running simultaneously, which you cannot do when you are dealing with a normal, with any code, as far as I'm concerned, that is linear. Because in a line-by-line code, the code is processing line by line, literally. So whenever you want to do two things at the same time, the one will always have to happen before the other, and that is not the case in Labview. Now, when I say two things happening at once, I'm talking about simpler things, not very complex things. You're still limited by your computer and its processor, but the Labview compiler, whenever it's running a code, it can divide things on your processors. So one processor can do one thing while the other's doing something else. As far as I know, you have no control over that. So no need to worry about it. It's a very fast program. Everything is great, and you can always decode and figure out what's going on in your code, unlike, again, in others. So this light bulb is a beautiful, beautiful tool that is essential whenever you're dealing with code. These here deal with the light bulb, and I'm not gonna worry about it. Then we have this for text size, and then the alignments again, and then we have this tool right here, and this is a cleanup tool, so it's a cleanup diagram, and you'll see once we start coding how your code becomes very messy and tangled, since it is, again, I have to say, this is a visual programmer, so this will just automatically get the Labview to clean it up for you. So we don't really need to worry about it, but just letting you guys know it's there. Now in the top right corner over here, you'll see this icon, which we can actually change to whatever we want. This is basically the icon of our program. I don't want to get into too much detail about it right now, but we will have to eventually. If we look on the front panel, you see that right next to it we have this diagram here, and this comes with many patterns that we can select. So what I did now is I right click and go to patterns, and you have all these patterns, and we'll get into why these are important, how to use them, and all sorts of things. So these are blocks technically, so this is where this gets its name, block diagram, and this is the front panel, because this is the front, this is what people see, and this is the block diagram. This is where you put your blocks of code. I think that's what it's called. I'm not 100% sure. Now, the way to interface with Labview is, the simplest way, I suppose, is to right-click. And when I right-click on the front panel, I get a set of controls. That's what they're called. I'm going to expand this. So there's many, many controls. If you have Labview, you might have more or less controls than me, depending on which version of Labview you have, as well which add-ons you have installed. So Labview is a huge, huge software with an endless amount of extras. For example, here I have this Connect one, and this one was to connect to the Microsoft Connect. We have an Arduino edition here. I have a robotics, which some people might have, and Division. Division is a very important one if you ask me. But I'm gonna say this, for example, the Connect, I did not use any of these. I was exploring, but I never used them. And the Arduino, I did get this, but I have not gotten to working with it yet. So we'll probably go ahead and attempt to do this at some point with our projects. So we'll come back to that. Important thing to notice here, that these controls, and this is what they call the front panel. So these controls are what the player will be controlling, the user will be changing, you know. And there's many types, and the most basic one right here, which shows up, you have, so you have number controls, the first one. You have buttons, text controls. User controls is empty, but it's there. I think you can customize what goes in here. And then you have the number indicators, right? And the LEDs, text indicators, and graph indicators. Now, there are indicators, and that's important to talk about. So there are controls and there are indicators. Basically, they're self-explanatory. The controls are like the inputs, the user controls them, and the indicators are like outputs. That's what the code gives back, right? So I'm going to go ahead and use one of these. Let's get a number control. And when I put the mouse over it, you can see there's many types of number controls. And I'm going to use this, let's see, I'm going to use the dial for this one. And then, so it shows up, and then I can place it. I could place it on the block diagram, but it doesn't matter. You'll see what happens. I'm going to place it on the front panel so you see it. There we go. So here's our dial, and I placed it on the front panel. Now, if I were to take this dial, well, I'm going to do let's do a pointer slide, okay? So if I put the pointer slide, instead of putting it here, if I put it on the block diagram, then it comes up wrong because it's not supposed to. So as you can see, it's not here. And I'll get into what's going on here later, but basically, whenever you're using something from the front panel, it should go on the front panel. So in most cases, this will be in maximum view, and then there we go. So now I have the slider, and then you can put whatever you want, right? But I have them in this dual view for now, for explanatory purposes. And then we have the indicators, and for this, let's have a tank over here, and I'm going to select this slide and delete it. So there we go. So now we have a control right here and a tank right here. Now these are all customizable, right? So I can customize these in any way I want to make them look better for the player. And obviously you can move them around, you can put them wherever you want. Oh, sorry. They are kind of annoying to move around sometimes. I think there's a keyboard shortcut where if you click it and click on them, then you won't interact with them. So as you can see here, I can fill up the tank as much as I want. I can turn the knob to whatever point I want. Important thing is that I can also change their dimensions however I want, right? So this needs to be a circular thing. As you can see now, it's very detailed. And this all goes to how annoying this could get. I'm going to keep these huge. I like them this way. Now, the other thing to notice is the name. You can name it whatever you want. I can call it dial 1, 2, 3, 4, whatever. And I can change the name of the tank. I can even move the name of the tank to anywhere I want. It doesn't have to be there, but obviously messing with this stuff is not recommended. It's probably a very bad thing to do, but it's an option. You can do it. You can even right click on it and you can do a lot more changing of things. If we go to the properties of it, we can change the color, we can change the max. So as you can see here, it goes from 0 all the way to 10, and you'll see here there's a lot of information on editing. One interesting one is needle color, so I can set the needle to red here, for example. You can change the name, you can make it visible or not visible. You can do a lot of things, right? So I'm just gonna leave this for now. You can change the dimensions right there, and you can change, in some cases, you can change the shape of things on it, right? So lock at minimum and maximum is that it goes from 0 to 10. You can't go to negative or more than 10. I'm not sure. So, oh, this is interesting. I've never seen this one before. Well, I don't usually mess in here. The other thing is that we'll get into data types, but if we go to the scale, I have the minimum 0 and the maximum 10. I can set the maximum to 100, for example. And as you can see now, it goes from 0 to 100. And you notice the needle went down back to 9, because that's where it was, right? So if I go back to 10, it's at 9 point something. So if I put it at 100 scale, it goes there. It's totally useless information, but it's there for now. Alright, I'm just going to say OK on this. And now the tank, we have the same options for the tank. Most of these will always look almost identical. So as you can see here, you can't do much. The fill, we can change the color, we can make it dark green, let's say gooey. And then the scale, we can make it up to whatever, we can make 1,000 if we want. We can make whatever we want. I'm going to leave it at 10 for now, for explanatory purposes. And I'm going to click OK, and I'm going to leave these there. You guys can mess with these however you want. Now, moving on to the block diagram. Now, as you can see, the dial, whenever I double click on anything, you have to look at the mouse. If you notice my mouse, it changes depending on where I am. And when it's this finger, that means I can interact, right? So this finger means I can interact. When it's this cross, the cross means that I can draw, or I can do things. I can select, I can right click. And then there's the arrow, and that normal mouse means you can actually click and do things. So here I'm selecting, and then here I can click and select the whole thing, or click on the name and select that. So you will get around to understanding how that works. Okay, so if I double click on any one of these, it will connect me to the block diagram, right? So I'm going to double click on my tank, goes here. It's important to know that the dial is this dial and the tank is this tank. So these here are the representation of what these are in the front panel. Again, to remind you, the front panel is what the user sees, right? What the user, so whenever the user is going to do something, this is all he's going to see, this is all he's going to interact with. He will not interact with the code. So what this is a representation, if you will, of this dial. And this here is a representation of this tank. And it's a one-to-one. Now, where I move this in the block diagram is irrelevant, and where I move the tank here is irrelevant. It doesn't matter where they are. And if I double-click on this dial, it highlights which dial. If I double-click on this tank, it highlights which tank. And that is because you might have multiple other things in here. So this gets pretty complicated. And each one does not need to have a unique name, right? So if I call both of these knob, that's totally fine. So it does not require you to have a unique name. Now obviously the code does its thing to figure this out, but this knob will always be the left knob and this knob will always be the right knob, right? So I can just sit and shuffle these around, and then I could ask you, alright, is this one the left one or the right one? And then let's see, if we double click it, that was the right one. So it does not really matter what order. Also, it's important to notice that if I delete these here or here, they will go in both ends because they are essentially the same thing. It's just one of them is for the user, one of them is for the code, and they are the same exact thing. Alright, so now going on to the block diagram. And again here, the main way to interface with this is to right click. But here we have functions. And these are the functions, the blocks. This is what the code is going to do. And again, there will be a ton of things in here. Lots of add-ins, lots of things. The most important ones are the ones that are going to show up right there, which are in the programming tab, right? So that's what's the default for me, is the programming tab. Now, an important thing to do here, or to learn, is that you could use these pins to pin something. So now when I click outside the box, it just goes. But if I pin this, or pin whatever part of the library I'm using, it will always be there, right? So now I have the programming right there. And here, when I click on the front panel, that goes away, obviously, because now we would be using controls. So there we go, here are controls. These are the express controls right here. And I click here, here are the programs, controls, programs, controls, program, depending on where you click. So that could be helpful for some people. If you have multiple screens, what I do is I actually have the front panel on a separate screen. I have the code here. I would like to have a third screen where I can put all these, all the important libraries that I use, but I don't have access to that yet. So it doesn't matter. So here we go, programming. So there's many things in here. So if you can see, we have structures, right? Oh yeah, when it's pinned, it gives you this direct lineage. It does not give you the blocular view. And by blocker, I mean, so if we go to structures here, it opens it as a separate thing. And then if I go to decorations, it goes to another separate or time structure. So, but here you would have to click the up button. So this is what you have in here. You have structures, arrays, clusters, numbers, Boolean strings, comparison, and everything else down here is more complicated, but we'll work with some of them later on. These first 7 are the most important ones that you will use everywhere. So I cannot describe how essential it is to understand what each one is, and we'll get into that as we move along, but I don't want to take too much time focusing on it. So we'll come back and use some things here, and again, remember each one of these, the ones that have this small black arrow, or it might be another color, mean that there's another library there, right? So if I go to numeric, you have all these functions, and these don't have arrows, but these here do. So if I click on any of these, it's going to take me to an entirely another library, for example, dealing with only complex numbers. So this is the complex number library. Here's normal numbers, where we can do simple things, add, subtract, multiply, divide. These are very straightforward. The comparison, if two things are equal, not equal, greater, blah blah blah. There's different structures. Most important structure is going to be our while loop right here, our for loop right here, and I'll go ahead and explain these with time, and our case structure. So these 3 are the most important ones to normal coding. You'll use time structures for some things, and you'll use other ones. We'll go into stacked sequences and flat sequences. Those are amazing. I'm going to call them space savers for now. A flat sequence, a sequence in itself, flat or stacked, has other purposes due to the due to the way that Labview allows for simultaneous things to happen. You could use sequences to stop that from happening. So basically, I would force the program to wait for something to finish before starting something else. That's what the sequence essentially is. And then we'll get into other things like variables. Decorations down here is obviously just for decoration. These here serve absolutely no purpose except to look cool. So here's a box, for example. It serves absolutely no purpose. We'll work with these as time goes by. Now, I'm gonna close this. So, now talking about the blocks themselves, and everything, as I said, is basically a block. It's a block diagram. You will see on the block this small arrow, and when I put the mouse over it, you see it changes into this spindle-looking welding thing, and gives you this dot. This is basically telling me that I can interact with it. Otherwise, it's this plus, which is to select and do things. The mouse changes into a normal mouse to click on it, and so on. So this here, as you can see, is a triangle moving outwards, so making it an output. This one's moving inwards, making it an input. So if I click here, and now I'm not clicking, everybody usually keeps that click. You don't have to, you just click once. And when I say click, I don't mean click and hold. And then now you can see that I'm getting all this. And this is just Labview trying to figure out what I want, and it's trying to draw a wire, literally it is a wire, to my mouse. Now if I click this and go here, as you can see, a line will be drawn, and this here is going to be a wire, and I'm manipulating simply by clicking on it. So now I have a wire connecting the output of the dial to the input of the tank, right? So if we go back to our front panel, output of the dial to the input of the tank. And this is my code right now. This right here is the simplest code I can ever possibly think about that does not use math. Now if I click run, when you click run here or here, it will run everywhere. So when I click run, I'm going to tell you what's going to happen, and hopefully you'll understand why. The data from dial is going to go down the line to update the tank. Now the dial is set to about 9 here, right? So what's going to happen when I run the code is that the tank is going to fill up at about 9. Remember, the tank is an indicator and this is a control. So it does not matter what I do here because this is an indicator, not a control. Now, it's true, I could change it, but it does not matter, right? It's just a visual trick. It's happening because it can happen. And you could use, in theory, the tank as a control, but that's something we're gonna work with later on. So I'm gonna run this from the block diagram just to show you what's gonna happen. And there we go. So since I clicked run, the program ran once, and by running once, it changed the setting of the tank to whatever the knob was. So the data from the dial goes down the line to the tank, right? Keep that in mind. Now, if I run it continuously, as we have discussed earlier, it will keep running. It will not stop. Now it's running continuously. Now, a few things to notice about running continuously, or if you have a program with while loops or a larger program, is that everything else here, all other functionalities disappear, and I cannot right click, right? So all functionalities have disappeared. You are running the code, you cannot essentially do anything but monitor. Now, the beauty of this is that if I click on the knob now, when I move the knob, it's going to automatically alter the value of the tank, right? Now, the tank is set from 0 to 10, so if I go above 10, it is not going to translate into the tank. So the tank is only set from 0 to 10. And now you can easily see how my control is affecting my indicator through the block diagram. So the dial, whatever I set it to, it goes down the line to the tank. Now remember this highlighter that I discussed? I'm going to go ahead and use it. I'm going to click on it. And now in a highlighting system, you see, I'm not sure if the camera is picking this up at 15 frames, but you see how the data is running from the dial to the tank, right? This becomes more important with complex systems. Also, when highlighting this, it shows you the value of the outputs. So in this case, it's 4.71 going through the line to the tank, and then when I change this, it will change every time it executes. Now remember that this is running in the debug mode, which means it's not running slower. It looks like it's lagging, but it's not lagging. What's going on is that the system is continuous, right? And we need to wait for the data to go to the tank for the code to end before starting over. So basically there's that, the time it takes for this to go down the wire and to the tank. Now I'm going to click stop on our system, and I'm going to turn off the light bulb. It's important to turn off the light bulb. If you don't, it won't turn off. What I'm going to do next is I'm going to delete this wire. So how did I do that? Yeah, so let me reconnect it. So if you click once on a wire, it selects that stretch. If you double click on a wire, it selects the entire wire. And then if you triple click, it will select even more, and you'll see that later on. So I'm going to delete this wire, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to start making a more complex, useless wire. So let's say that you can use clicking. So I click once here, then click, 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 click. I'm simulating the clicks, but I think that's automatically done for me by the recording software. Okay, so I'm just making a really long, annoying wire here, and at the end I'm going to do this. There we go. So as you can see, where I had it squaring off, it will automatically cut off. If I, for example, come here and I connect this wire to this wire, what's going to happen is this loop is going to be cut out, and so on and so on. Now I'm going to leave it this way. I'm going to turn off my highlighter, and I'm going to click run once, and you'll see how long it will take. You will notice the dot running down the wire, trying to get all the way to the tank. Now this is done instantly if we are not in the debug mode. This is just showing you what's going on. If you have branches and other things, you will see it go through. So without this is just instantaneous, as you can see. So I'm going to set this to something else and then run it once, instant. Alright. This cleanup The only reason I did this to show you the cleanup is if I click cleanup, it's going to clean up all these messy wires and simplify my system. So the system could not be simpler than this, as you can see. So that's what cleanup does. It automatically simplifies your system. Alright, so I believe this is the most basic way I can explain Labview as far as blocks go. But to truly appreciate this, I'm going to address the problem that we were having when we go, okay, let me run this, when we go above 10. Because of this is 10, this goes up to 10, this goes up to 100. Now obviously I can change this, but I want to show you something. So all we need to do is take the input from the dial, divided by 10 to the input to the tank, right? So if I right click here and I go to my numeric system, I have a division block. So I'm going to click on divide. Now I want to introduce you to something important after I've placed this. Now you can place this anywhere, right? It's visual. Something that's very helpful and important is the help. And you just click Control and H and it comes up. Here it is. This is the help. And this will basically gives you a quick help on whatever you're clicking on, right? So this is an object from the front panel, but whenever you're clicking on a block, for example division, it shows you the input. So this top input's the X, bottom input the Y, the output's then be the X divided by the Y, and it gives you more and more important and relevant information. So what I want to do is I want to take the input from the dial, right? That's the input from the dial, and look what happens when I double click on when I single click on this wire, it selects there. When I single click, it selects this wire. When I double click, it selects the entire branch, and when I triple click, it selects everything, the whole tree. So in this case, I want to double click to get rid of this wire, because if I do not, I'm going to run into errors by connecting the output to the tank. Because now, let me go ahead and do that. Because now, see, it's dotted, which means there is an error. Now it's a cyclic system here, which does not work, right? So the output from the dial cannot go straight here and then be divided by something and go back here. Also, you can look at this, that the divided number cannot go backwards on the wire to the division. So there is like a sort of logical order here. So I'm going to double click this branch and delete it. And there we go. Now the system is working. The input from the dial enters into my division function right here. There we go. And then to the tank. Now this division function is not complete, and I know this from experience, but if you guys have any problems, if you go up here, you will notice it does not let you run. You can list errors if you want, but in this case it's pretty obvious. The error is that the division is not dividing by anything, right? So I'm taking in the dial, what am I dividing by? And I need something here. What I need is a numeric here. This is a numeric constant. It's a very important thing. This is where you can access it, and you can access as a double numeric constant. This just comes down to the precision and the decimals and all this stuff. It does not really matter. These two, for simple purposes, are identical. It does not matter. Another way, so what I could do is I could select the number here, place it here, right? So there we go, and then I connect the number to the division at the bottom, and then I give this a number. So let's say I want to divide by 10 by double clicking. So now it takes the dial input and the 10, divides the dial by 10, and gives me the output to the tank. Another way I could have done this, and this is a more recommended way, shall I say, is if you right click on any point where you have the spindle, you get a lot of options, but one of them is this create. And I can create a constant, a control, or an indicator. In this case, creating an indicator will do nothing. Creating a constant is what we want. And our constant, we double click and we set it to 10. Now, as far as creating controls and indicators, I'm going to give you an example. If we create a control, and I'm going to move this block, and I double click on it, you see it's created it up here as a control. So that means that the user can say, okay, divide by 10, or no, divide by 5, or whatever the user wants, right? For now, I'm going to leave it there, and I'll say divide by 10. I'll leave it as a control for emphasis. And we divide it, and it goes to the tank. right? Very simple. So now when I click play, what do you think will happen? So this is set to about there. If I click it, let's say it's set to 5, right? And here it's set to 4 point something. When I play before, if I click the run, it would go up to 5, right? But now we're dividing by 10. So what's going to happen is this will go to 0.5 down here. And there we go. There it is, set 0.5. If I run it continuously, you'll see how this is now working. So 80, about 80, divided by 10 is about 8. And then a full 100 is a full 10. And this is because I'm dividing by 10. What if I divide by 5? There we go. So 50 is now the full because I'm dividing by 5. 40 divided by 5 is 8. 30 divided by 5 is 6. 5 divided by 5 is 1. And so on. What if I divide by 20? So now 10 divided by 20 is half. 50 is 25, right? And 100 is just 5, right? So divide by 2 and then divide by 10. That's basically what dividing by 20 is. So you guys get to see the picture. This is how the system works. I'm going to stop this. Now, normally you should use as little controls as possible, if you ask me, just to simplify things on the user. But sometimes it is important to have all these things. So now let me run this continuously. This is the program we just made. It's very simple, very silly, but it opens up the horizon to many, many amazing things that you can do with this program. So that will be all for today, guys. I hope you guys enjoyed this. And I'm going to go ahead and... this just brings up a topic. I'm going to close the block diagram. And technically, you do not need the block diagram. As you can see, when I try to close the front panel, it gives me options to save or not save. But if you ever close the front panel, an easy way to bring it back is to simply click Control and E. The letter E, right? That is the fastest way to bring it back. That's the easy shortcut. And you can also, if I have this maximized and this maximized, you can switch between the two by also clicking Control E. So as you can see, I'm clicking Control E right now, and I can switch between both of these. So that's the easy way to jump through them. So I'm gonna close this, and I'm not gonna save this for now. And it will take you back in a second. There we go. It takes us back to the starting point where we can start off or open old projects or do whatever. You can go file, open a project, or do whatever. Alright guys, thank you for watching this episode, and if anyone has anything to say, please feel free to do so. I'll see you guys in our next episode. Bye.